Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Awaken Empowered podcast. I'm Micheila Sheldan. I'm here with Ethan Fox. And several months back, we did a podcast dedicated to health and longevity. And recently, I've been noticing in my inner circle community and on social media that a lot of people are talking about struggling with physical health symptoms, whether they be ascension-like symptoms or very complex things like autoimmunity, gut issues, exhaustion. And this is something that we thought we would continue the conversation about because it's a very complex time on planet Earth to be existing here in a physical body. And as I've alluded to in many of our past conversations, I think there's a time and place for us to focus on certain areas. And for many years, we've been very tuned in to our spiritual awakening and focused on all of the astral gifts, abilities, contact that we have been so blessed to actually receive. And this is a period of spiritual embodiment whereby we're being called, or I think the body is offering us an invitation to actually walk the talk and to put into place all of the things that we've learned in the past many years that we've been going through this very intense spiritual acceleration. However, it can be hard when it feels like we're at a stopping point because we've gotten to this place where we know our purpose. We're really excited to create things in the world. We may have made a lot of really important changes already in our physical lives and then feel as if the universe is holding us back. So I think there's a lot of different angles that we can take on this. But first and foremost, I believe that if we are going to become more multidimensional in our focus and our perception, we're going to have to step out of the more linear and rigid ideas of what is causing our physical difficulties.
Yeah, I think the thing that is really important to set an overall context for the conversation today from a broader perspective is that we all came here to experience different things and to evolve through different growth experiences. And I've found over the years of looking at different people's astrology charts and numerology charts and also working with them very closely in other capacities, is that we all have different challenges. And, like Micheila is more challenged with health-related things. And in my past, I've been more challenged in career and finance. So there are different areas where we have difficulties and that we are here to grow and evolve through, and where choices can be made to raise those experiences to a higher level. And, for example, I think somebody with chronic health problems may feel like they would sacrifice money or other areas where they don't struggle for better health. But I also think the reverse is true. So if you give up your health for money or money for health, you're still going to end up with another challenge. So it's something that it's not really a question of what are we willing to give up to get the thing that we want, and we're willing to sacrifice the thing we currently have. Because I think there are many people in the world, for example, who have great health but no money, and who sell their organs for to have more money, or they'll work at jobs that are very bad for their health or dangerous for their health, so that they have more money, because money is the area where they're challenged. So I think when we're having health problems and we feel like we would do anything to not have that, we have to understand that we only feel that way because it's an area where we have a difficulty. And when we're in those difficult points, we may think that we'd be willing to sacrifice anything to have that area be better. As I've talked about many times in my past, I've had difficulties in money and finance and things like that. And so that was an area where I made a lot of sacrifices as well. So I think it's important to set that context and that understanding that these life experiences are here, that each of us choose so that we can evolve through it by making good choices as we go through it. It's not meant to be a struggle. And I think all health journeys, or any other kind of journey, financial, health, any area where we are challenged, are there for us to guide us in a particular direction, to learn new things and to experience things and to evolve and grow in ways that we otherwise would not. And that would be true for me in my journey as well in this life. And many of the things that I struggled with when I was younger are things that are second nature to me now, that if I knew back then, I wouldn't have had those challenges. And so as I've evolved in this life, the areas where I've had difficulties in the past are areas where I've continued to improve as a result of the difficulties. And I think that's what health is an opportunity for us to do there as well.
I agree with that. And as someone who has had many personal struggles with health, even as a young child, I can look back at my life and see the blessing that it was, even though it wasn't something that I wanted at the time, because in every experience that I had, my life completely shifted. And sometimes that meant things had to go away in order for me to rebirth a new reality. And I think ultimately that's why so many of us in the collective right now incarnated perhaps with that pattern, because I believe that the body is leading us right now, if we will allow it, into the fifth dimension, simply because there isn't any one reason that things are going wrong. And that's what I've had to come to accept about my own recent challenges. And I've definitely had my own, like many of you out there, where it's easy to default back to old patterns and belief systems and ways of being, in a very linear sense, trying to diagnose something that's going on that is multidimensional and complex and perhaps is meant to be an experience, but also being caused, I think, by the environment and the timeline that we're in. So I think those things work symbiotically. We have to kind of think even beyond ourselves and into the entire collective and look at what are the patterns. So, for example, right now I notice a lot of people have these weird ascension symptoms, and we can bang our head against the wall talking about ascension symptoms all day long. And I know people get really frustrated. What am I going to do about this? Why do we have to go through all of these energies and all of this discomfort? Well, if you think about the very title, ascension symptom, it's to me a catalyst for our own evolution. So we wouldn't have a response to something if there wasn't also something that we were meant to offer the world. And the guides talk about this all the time in my channeled readings, for example, about empaths or people who are extremely sensitive to energy, where they're always getting hit or receiving all of this lower vibrational stuff from other people, or in certain, places that they visit. And what the guides almost always reveal is you're only receiving because there is some message there for you, or a part of your service or divine plan is to somehow impact that energy. So I've noticed a lot of people who are sensitives like this, they take the hit and they feel the energy, but they don't realize that they're actually responding to it in some very unconscious and spontaneous way. And so if we put that into context with a health challenge, it isn't necessarily what we do, I think, but who we're becoming through the challenge that is so important. So if we're all here birthing a fifth dimensional reality, and we are becoming more sensitive, and we've worked a lot on our spiritual practice, it's natural, I think, to imagine that we're going to struggle with this integrative period, which, by the way, is a timeline convergence. The guides have talked about this so much in my various channeled transmissions. A timeline convergence is like when we have a crescendo of multiple timelines that are super important to our evolution. coming back around from history. And even in the channeled revelations, the guides have brought this into the story. You know, we are facing the darkest of the dark, timelines from the, you know, the Anunnaki, for example, and the lightest of light, going back to Atlantis. And all of that is existent right now in our fields, on the planet. So what we're attempting to do is neutralize it all and find a new balance within it.
What you're saying is really important, because one thing that most people who don't know you personally don't realize is you become somewhat of an expert in health because of everything you've had to learn over the years. So you've gone to a lot of different practitioners, you've tried different modalities, you've tried different technologies. And so you're talking about who you become. And ultimately, I think that's the journey. Is it's not about all the things you do or all the things you tried or all the different doctors you went to and all the failures or successes you had, but it's who are you becoming in that journey to that end result. And you become an expert. You've tried so many different things that most people never even heard of or would have never tried. And as a result, at the end of the journey, you're going to have increased your knowledge, your wisdom, and become an expert in that area. And same for me. When I was younger, I knew nothing about business or finance or any of those things, and I struggled with those things. And as a result of being in that space my entire life and in many challenges I've had to face, I've become an expert in those areas as well, or much more expert than when I was younger. So I think that's the journey that we need to look at, is that it's not about us. It's not in place for us to struggle or suffer. It's there to guide us to experiencing new things and learning new things and meeting different people. And at the end of that journey, we become different people. Just like the person I am today would not have made the mistakes I made when I was younger. Not that they're mistakes, but I would have known better, right? I would have had more of a knowledge in those areas. And in the same way, if you were to go back to the beginning, you would do things differently as well. And that's the point, is who you're becoming in that journey. And that is, I think, where we tend to lose sight of that, because a lot of times when we're in the midst of a challenge or a difficult thing, whether it be health or something else, it's easy for us to lose sight of the point, that it's about who we're becoming. And so in that sense, in my opinion, I don't think it matters what you do or what you try, whether you try different methods to heal yourself or you don't. I think it's really more about how you go about that journey and who you become in the process of that journey. So struggling is really not necessary, although, we have a tendency to do that anyway. Another thing, in the last channel Revelations, the guides talked a lot about the importance of emotion and how emotion is really the key to us being more powerful human beings. And it's something that we have not been encouraged to embrace in this timeline that we've been walking for 13,000 years, because a lot of society has been structured around a reptilian consciousness, which is much more mind-based, even in the spiritual modalities. I mean, all of the spiritual world these days is based in either Buddhism or Hinduism or some variation of those kinds of religious modalities. I'm not talking about religions, but religions I think are different. But in the spiritual community, we're primarily focused in those areas, or teachings that came from there. For example, meditation or yoga or any number of things, chanting, things like that, all come from Buddhism or Hinduism or a variation of those religions. And those are both originated in a reptilian consciousness. And so that's why they're more mind-based. And while the guide said, while that is good in some respects because mind helps us to stay in the present moment, it also discourages us from experiencing our emotional aspect, which we've been all taught that experiencing emotions is a bad thing. But the reality is that's really where the power is. But I think there's a difference between experiencing emotions and suffering through emotions. So most people, they suffer, especially in the world today. There's so much suffering going on through emotions. But I think what the guides are saying is really more about, for example, if you're feeling something in the body, whether it's a physical pain or an emotional pain, to go into that fully and to experience that intensely. And if you do that, that emotion can pass faster. And I think that's the thing is, on the surface, you may have a physical concern, whether it's health or whether it's financial or otherwise. And that's oftentimes something that is an external stimulant. And even if it's in your body, and that external stimulant can produce an emotional reaction. And I think whether it be whatever area of your life it is, whether it's health or finance or otherwise, that emotion is where I see a lot of the problems, because I think a lot of people approach the solution to their problems from a state of desperation or suffering. And I don't think any positive result can come from that. But on the other hand, if you were to go fully into that emotion, experience it intensely and let it dissipate, and then from there make a decision, if any decision even needs to be made, I think you can make better choices. And that's the way to becoming a better person in the journey that you're taking, whatever journey that is.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think emotion has been huge in terms of healing, and it's been a miss for us as a human collective because we've been focused so much on the physical linear body and the various, diagnoses and processes and things like that, in the spiritual community, we're obviously starting to uncover a lot of methodology and various practices that we can use to understand where emotion has been stuck. But I want to play off of that for a minute because from a collective standpoint, truly one of the emotions that we've been really stuck in that I think is unrecognizable to us anymore is fear. So the guides would say that what we've created in the third dimension has its structure founded in fear, everything. So when you say not making a decision, I agree with that with one caveat. I think that from a collective vantage point, those of us who are sensitive, struggling with ascension symptoms or, unknown problems, diseases, complexities, things like that, are actually meant to take the paths less traveled because conventional medicine and those old structures are based in fear. And it is what we first jump to when we believe something is wrong. It's just ingrained in us. It's been programmed in us to think that way. I do it too. So I find myself having to unravel from that old automatic assumption that something within my body is actually wrong. And what I think it is a message, right? So when we have discomfort, pain, even disease, whatever it is, it's a message from the body that we are not going in the right direction or something's going wrong in our environment that's causing us to become stagnant. So the guides will say, for example, pain, discomfort, fear, those are all stagnant vibrations. They tend to hold us back. So when we are experiencing some type of physical anomaly, it's a move forward for us. It's a push forward out of our old way of being. And right now, I think that can be scary because the new isn't fully here yet. It's not fully developed, even though we have a lot of great alternative doctors, processes, medicines, technologies. To me, many of them feel like a bridge. They're not fully cooked or developed yet. And what I've come to is I believe I am the only person who can heal me. And that's a tough realization to actually accept because not unlike fear being a theme, we have also been led to put our trust in saviors, people outside of us who know more than we do. And I've had to take back that knowledge and that power within myself to do the research, do the work to understand, not even understand, I think to carve out a path of comfort beyond understanding, because what we'll get into in a few moments is, we're in a very, as I mentioned, difficult timeline experience. We are still holding on to the third dimension and we are managing all of that energy as we move into the fifth. And there are a lot of things, unfortunately, happening with frequency that have to be accounted for when we think about our physical health.
At this time, we can't live as we've lived in the past, or at least in the past of when we were younger, because the world has changed dramatically, and we're in an unusual pressure cooker period. Not that everything was perfect when we were younger, but we didn't have chemtrails then, or at least it was still very new to where, in Michigan, I don't think we had any. We didn't have all the radiation, smart meters, cellular phones. Back then people had pagers and that was about it. So we didn't have all the satellites in space transmitting, all kinds of radiation. So there are so many factors today that were not present then, and this decade, I think those things are going to intensify because we're at a point, as we've discussed in the previous channel revelation shows, where the world leaders are also, because they are of a reptilian consciousness and they've been in proximity with human beings, as the guides say, they are becoming more human as well. And because of that, they are also experiencing emotions, and it's for them more uncomfortable than it is for us. And so they're in a state of fear because they're losing the battle to keep control of all the people. And because of that, they're going to, they have all the money and the power, technology, things like that. And so they're going to throw everything at the wall, I think, this decade as they possibly can in order to maintain control of the people. And so that means for us, we're going to be dealing with circumstances we've never had to deal with before. So I think a lot of people right now who are having health problems, and they're thinking, well, maybe I need to change my diet, or maybe I need to do a cleanse, or I need to go to this clinic and do this thing, or have, mercury removed or whatever. Not that those things are bad, but you do all those things and nothing changes. And that's because there are external circumstances we can't control right now. We can't control what the world leaders are going to do. We can't control energy weapons, and we can't control HARP and chemtrails and these things, which we've touched on in the past. And those factors, I think, are going to intensify. Not to mention they're starting fires everywhere, so the air is not clean like it used to be. And I think in response to their global warming agenda, we're going to see a lot more toxins in the air that we've never had before. That's something new just in the last couple of years. A lot more fires and chemical explosions and things like that. So there are many factors that we can't control that are external, and I think until you look at those things, whatever you're doing to treat your body itself may not have any effect. And so this decade, I think we have to go that extra little bit and to research those areas and live in a way that we can to some degree be insulated from those external factors if possible. Going the conventional route, even if the unconventional route, which you're taking, that's still the conventional route now, right? The unconventional route, which you've been taking, is no longer unconventional because there are all these other factors now that did not exist 10 years ago or even 5 years ago that you now have to account for. And so now what's unconventional is you're going to have to account for all these things too. And whatever else they throw at us in this decade that you don't even know yet, right? And so if you do all these other things that we know to do, or at least try, and we don't consider all of the repercussions of things happening in the world that we can't control, that are going to escalate, then I think we're at a disadvantage, and we may always just barely be treading water. And I think that's what a lot of people's health problems, I think, are related to factors that they can't control. Electromagnetic radiation and energy weapons and things like that. And even, recently I watched a video about in Antarctica, they've got some technologies that they're using to transmit thoughts into people's heads. And I know you hear stuff all the time, right? That are not your thoughts, right? And I know you've told me other people in the spiritual community are also hearing things like that. So these are factors we didn't have to deal with 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But now all of a sudden people are waking up, or in the middle of the night, they're having thoughts that are not their own. And so these are factors that are affecting our health that we're not currently accounting for, and we're going to have to if we want to get through this time and maintain health.
I think where we'll go with this conversation is taking the complexity out and bringing in some simplicity. But before we do, we have to cover all of these various things, and it can sound defeating and fearful. But what Mary Magdalene always says is, to in order to transmute anything, we have to clearly see what we're here to transmute. And I think that's the first step, because yes, I definitely have had some recent encounters, we'll say, in dream state where I was dreaming, but also very awake and conscious in the dream, and was doing things that I would never choose to do, like getting vaccinated or having a chip implanted in my arm, and thinking at the same time, I would never do this. Why am I dreaming this? And then woke up and immediately tuned into my guides. And yes, of course, they confirm that we're being implanted, programmed with these ideas. So you can imagine the force of that energy on your physical body if it's able to implant something in your mind. I've also seen this pattern in my inner circle. We've been talking about it there, and in private session. I've had, for example, someone just coming off of a spiritual retreat where there was a group meditation, and everyone had a pretty ugly insight that was implanted into their minds during the meditation. And we found out that that was exactly what it was. So when we know these things, certainly I think we're going to do some things to counteract it, obviously. But I also believe gradually our bodies are going to become more resilient, because anything that's new in the environment, we're going to have to adjust to and go through a phase of imbalance. And, we've done that all along with all of these electromagnetics they've been throwing at us, and the intensity of that growing and growing. So we're going through these periods of ebb and flow where, things ramp up and we get hit with all of this frequency. And then our bodies tend to adjust, or we just choose to do things that make them more resilient. So, when we go about this whole doing part, I think it's important to, like you said, go into it with more of a curiosity. And sometimes you will use the term excitement, which is really hard. I think, for someone who is out there in a chronic condition, to get excited about trying new things, but that is ultimately what's ushering in the new earth. So once you try something and it doesn't work, you now have a foothold on what else might possibly come into your experience that could be better. And I've been doing lots of things, in my home, and exploring new ideas about both how to protect and block out these frequencies, but also from a vibrational standpoint, make myself a little bit more resilient, my energy field more resilient. And I asked the guides after I had that encounter, what do I need to do in order to fix this? And the immediate response was, know thyself. And they said, in ancient times, this teaching was the prominent piece of any spiritual evolution, because there were always those on counterattack. There were, even in ancient times, we've gone through some of these periods in the Channeled Revelation show where there were malevolent technologies. There were beings trying to hack into our DNA. And so that's what we're experiencing again. But the guides say, when you know the self, you can distinguish between what you know and who you are to be, and what others are trying to make you into. And I think that's where consciousness really comes in. So we talk a lot in these podcasts about the difference between the third and the fifth dimension. And I wonder if those who haven't awakened to these ideas maybe they are being programmed and they have no idea. They're just following suit with all of these belief systems that are being programmed into them while they sleep, and signing up for all of the things that those in power want them to do. But because I had expanded my consciousness, I believe, to the degree that I had, it was easy for me in the midst of that incoming frequency to discern what was me and what wasn't. And so they say that's the first step, is we need to be able to discern. And I think ultimately that's consciousness. And I think that discernment actually can be applied to the positive stuff just as much as the negative. For example, we have very intense solar storms and plasma injections right now coming to Earth. Remember, the lightest of the light and the darkest of the dark. And I've tracked some of that myself, and I do notice that leading up to a significant solar event, I don't feel good. Things start to go a little haywire. I get a headache. I'm extremely exhausted. And then once that solar storm passes, I feel a lot better. And I think just knowing that, being able to discern whether or not, we truly are getting sick, or there's something wrong in the body, or something's going right is really important, because having that perspective is everything. So it really softens the blow in terms of that fear and jumping to conclusions that pull us into the old, 3D models and testing and diagnosis and all of that, because I truly think the majority of us are really just going through, like we said, this wonky time of very intense energy that the body is not used to receiving. So when it comes to discernment, I think one of the biggest factors is, can we trust ourselves? Which goes back to the savior mentality, right? And certainly there are doctors and experts out there who have incredible training. And even in the alternative world, we have some really great information. But as an individual, as someone who is a unique manifestation of consciousness, it is crucial, I believe, in this timeline, in the period that we're in, that we find that trust within ourselves to guide our own journey. Because if we don't, we might find ourselves entangled in the wrong things. And I don't think anything ever goes to waste. So we've talked in the last show, I'm someone who tries a lot of things. I'm a doer. I like to be active. I feel like, I do a lot of research. I feel like I can conquer things. I'm really tuned into my health. A lot of those things haven't worked for me, but a small fraction of them have. And how do I really know? I know when I improve that something good happened. But to me, I think it's building my confidence and my faith in myself enough to take the reins, which we can apply to this entire timeline shift, because unless we take the reins in our lives and in so many different areas, whether it's work or finance or, anything else, we're going to find ourselves back in the old model, in that restrictive system that's collapsing on itself.
Well, one thing you mentioned that I think is important is that I always say, that you say it's hard to apply, which, applying excitement to circumstances, which I know, because it doesn't matter what the circumstance is, and you may be talking about health, but it could be anything. People could, especially these days, struggling financially, or other kinds of problems in the world, or houses burning down, or whatever the case may be. When you're in the middle of it, it's hard to see that as exciting. But I think we can at least try to get into a curiosity. With curiosity, is probably easier. And as I've observed you going through your health journey over the years, one thing I've noticed is, while you've tried lots of things, and many of those things you can't say directly worked, but the side effect was what actually was the benefit. You might have gone to a particular health practitioner or a doctor, and they took you in this one direction, and in the end, it didn't work, but you got out of it this new technology that you never heard about before, and you bought it for yourself, and that ended up working. Or you learned some new thing or some new protocol, not directly because of the person you're working with, but as a result of going through that journey, and then you included that as part of your regular routine. And so I've watched you over the years, you keep adding more and more things to your routine that becomes a part of your own personal health management program. So nothing was really the result directly of the things you did, but they were all side effects. And I think if we rush headfirst into a health problem to desperately try to solve it without the excitement or at least curiosity about what can we get out of this, that, the know thyself idea, right? About creating something about for ourselves, as opposed to seeking a hero to save us, whether that be in the form of a doctor or somebody else. Doctors are practicing, right? That's why they call it a practice. They're practicing just like all of us are practicing. Engineers, they're practicing. Everybody is learning on their journey. Nobody is born an expert. So if you go to a doctor, they are learning. They're learning by practicing on everybody who comes to them as a patient. And so maybe a doctor, when they've had 50 years of practice, they're better, just like I'm better at finance than I was 30 years ago. And where now I know a lot of things that I wouldn't have, that mistakes that I wouldn't have made when I was 30 years ago. The same is true for a doctor. And they're evolving, they're in their journey. So they may not know what they're doing in the particular area. And I think that's where we have to be careful about looking for other people to be our savior. And instead, we are the savior, right? And we have to look at each experience as an opportunity to grow ourselves and to see what can we gain from that journey, as opposed to, I'm going to this person, they're going to fix me. And so as my observation of you has been, those people haven't fixed you, but out of each experience, you've gained some new thing. You've gained some new technology that you bought, that you're using, that actually works and helps you, or some new protocol that you got for yourself, or some new routine that you follow for yourself. So in the end, you are the one who's curing yourself. And as a result of the journey and the challenges that have put you in front of these different people and these different ideas that you never would have done. If you never had health problems, you probably would still be eating conventional food, not organic or anything like that. It was your health problems that forced you to do that in the first place, wasn't it? 20 years ago, something like that. So the same would be true for me. In the areas that I have been challenged in my life, I have been forced to learn different things. And I've studied under different teachers. I took tons of classes in investing and finance and all these things growing up. And none of them got me to where I wanted to go. I learned things, but none of those teachers made me rich. And none of those programs that I spent thousands and tens of thousands of dollars on actually provided the result that they promised. But each one of those things, I learned things, and I became better and smarter in that area until I became the expert that I always wanted to go to. If I could have been the expert that could have taught me 30 years ago, that would have been the person to go to learn everything that I needed to learn. But that person didn't exist 30 years ago. And I think that's the important thing that I observe in your journey as well, that we all need to consider, is this is not about suffering. It's not about fixing the problem that's in front of us. It's about looking at each one of those circumstances with enthusiasm and or at least curiosity about who can we become in the process of trying to solve that thing. Instead of trying to solve the thing, use the problem as a means to change who you are, or to become someone better, or to learn some new thing, because that is actually the result that's going to pay off in the long run. That's going to change who you are. And at the end of this life, you'll have all of that experience, all of that wisdom and knowledge that you take with you. Can't take the body with you. The body is just here for a period of time. It's going to be dust in the earth. 1,000 years from now, no one will even know you were here. But the journey that you went through and how you went through that journey, whether you went through it in excitement or curiosity or desperation and suffering, that you will take with you. And that is what you will carry forward into the next experience and the next experience. And I think that's the important thing that we all need to consider in whatever area we're struggling in, um, rather than looking at it as I've got to fix this problem, and rather what can I gain from the journey trying to fix this problem.
Yeah, I've gained a lot in my health quest and, technologies, knowledge, various routines. But I think truly at this juncture that we're in terms of, the complexity of health, some of the most important and successful things that I've done is what I've stripped away, which has more to do with my lifestyle. And the fifth dimension is calling us to be more at ease, less wound into a schedule, not having all the burden and the responsibility on our shoulders that has been trained into us that's really not important. Letting go of perfectionism, all of these things have not been easy for me because I grew up, working hard with that, you know, model in my head that the rewards come from hard work. So sitting for me equals being worthless. And when your body's in crisis and you don't know how to solve it, it's easy to go to some of the more, expensive and, complex things. But to be honest, I had to learn how to relax. I had to learn how to strip things off my calendar that weren't important. And even getting out of my head in terms of what the experience was holding me back from, because I know our audience very well. They're all out there with big missions. We all feel this passion to change the world and to do good things. And then we get sick and we feel like we're not doing our, service justice. But there's a time and a place for everything, as we've talked about. So right now, it might not be the time for me to be out there in a big way doing what I do because I don't know what's coming in the future. Those of you who've done my courses understand the concept of the mystery school. The guides always say it's called a mystery school because we were trained to get into the mystery of what was yet to come so that we weren't constantly trying to figure it out or jumping into the future and being in fear. And to me, that's been a really huge thing, even beyond diet, which I've even up leveled again. I mean, I've been eating organic, very clean, very healthy for a good number of years. But over the last 2 to 3 years, what I've found is eating simply has been what my body needs and craves. We have a lot of gut issues right now. And I think that has to do with the amount of stress we've been under. I mean, even if you don't feel stress right now, let's face it, we've been going through a pandemic period. It's been stressful. So we have to think about how much can we really digest. And in an age of technology, how much information, how much food can our bodies digest, and how much rest do we need in order to digest all of that? So for me, it's been more rest than work. It's been stepping back from the idea of working out and not looking at my body through the lens of vanity so much as through the lens of a spiritual vehicle. My body is a spiritual vehicle. So what does it need right now that is important to the future of my spiritual contribution? I can figure that out simply by sitting still. Because if I'm tired, if I have ascension symptoms and I'm tired and I resist that, then I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to make the situation worse. So when we have these uncomfortable situations in the body, what the guides have taught me and what we've learned in some of the channeled courses is we have to listen to the body. We have to be like our angelic guide and say, it's okay. It's okay to not accomplish everything that was on your to-do list this week. It's okay if you need extra sleep. It's okay if you take a day off, because In the fifth dimension, we're learning that all of that busy stuff isn't really necessary to accomplish where we need to go.
To paraphrase a quote from Ecclesiastes, there's a time for every purpose under heaven. And I think that is something that very few people consider unless you're an astrologer or numerologist, because you learn as you've studied cycles for a long time that everything happens at certain times. And you don't have to do anything to make them happen, they just happen because you set your life out at the beginning to have certain patterns at certain times for you to have those experiences. So, from that context, if you're going to go through a health problem, it'll be there in your cycles. And from that vantage point, my view would be there's nothing that needs to be fixed. There's nothing that needs to be done. It is something that it's being orchestrated on your behalf. Now, you as a human being and a human body may not want that. You as a human being walking your human journey may say, well, I don't want that health problem right now. But the soul that is you in its infinite wisdom chose that journey for some reason at that time. And it's going to unfold at that time, regardless of what you think you want in your human journey, because it's something that you are going to gain and grow through. So if that's going from point A to point B, whether that be a short-term cycle that may be just days or weeks, or if it's a long-term cycle that may be a decade or even more than one decade, it's going to see itself through. And it's not something that you can halt from the human being that's walking with an ego in this body, because that human being doesn't know in most cases what the bigger journey is supposed to be. I mean, there's so many people who are having all kinds of problems in their lives, and nobody would have asked for those things, right? And yet everybody's going through them because their soul chose to have those experiences. It wouldn't happen by accident. So if you know a problem's going to happen from point A to point B, there's no sense in struggling because it's going to happen anyway, whether you struggle or not. So you might as well walk that path in as a positive way as possible, because you know it's going to be from here to here. And even in my own cycles, I follow things like that. If I have certain difficult periods and I can see it in the charts, I will embrace that idea or accept that idea and say, okay, well, it's going to happen from here to here, so I'm going to have to walk it anyway. So when things happen, even though I may have an emotional reaction to it when those things are happening, I fully expected they were going to happen. And so, much like I say, this decade until 2033, things on the planet are going to be very difficult because world leaders are going to make it difficult for us. And so knowing that, I'm prepared for the circumstances that will come up. I don't know what they specifically will be, but that's going to be a period of challenge. And knowing that, I can walk that path knowing that it's going to happen, that there's some positive outcome that will come as a result of the journey. So why suffer? Why struggle? And instead, try to make positive choices, learn and evolve and grow. Much like we put the studio together because everything in the world fell apart the last few years. On the other hand, though, it also lined up with my own personal cycles. So in a manner of speaking, I can look at the world and the world leaders and be angry with them for what they did that caused everything to fall apart. On the other hand, I can observe that my life was supposed to go in this direction anyway during this time, and all of their actions just simply orchestrated my own experience. The same is true for other personal experiences, whether it be a health problem or not. They're all present in our cycles. Nothing happens to us by accident that we didn't already choose. So if you know point A to point B, these things are going to occur, and nothing we do is going to make it stop sooner, because it's supposed to occur for this period of time. And it's different for everybody what that range of time is. Then we might as well make the most of that journey and go through and experience as much as we can, so that when we get to the end and it passes, we move on to the next thing, whatever that is. So I think that's where a lot of us can maybe change our viewpoints, whether we're struggling with health or money or anything, that these circumstances occur in a timely fashion when that purpose serves our soul's journey. And they are going to happen whether we like it or not. And so if they're going to happen whether we like it or not, the only thing left to do is not to fix it, because it'll fix itself, but rather to choose how we walk from the beginning to the end of that cycle. We can walk while desperately trying to fix it and failing because it's not time for it to be fixed yet. Or we can walk knowing, well, it's going to last X amount of time. We might as well enjoy the journey as much as possible. Gain something from it. Be curious and explore and learn and evolve, knowing that when it gets to the end, it's going to go away on its own. And it may go away because of something we did at the very end, and we may think, oh, it's that thing that we did that solved it. Or it may just go away on its own and we did nothing. I think that's the choice we have, is we can walk that path and do nothing, and it's going to go away on its own. Or we can walk that path and do a million things, and it's still going to go away on its own. That doesn't matter, I don't think. I think it's how we walk that path. If we do a million things, and we do it with excitement, enthusiasm, curiosity, and it still goes away on its own at the right time, that's good. Or we can do absolutely nothing, and it'll still go away on its own at the right time, and that's also good. Where I see difficulty, or where I think we could improve, is when we go from here to here and we suffer and we struggle and we're miserable through the whole journey. And that's, I think, the only thing that needs to change when it comes to addressing life's difficulties, whether it be health or otherwise. And certainly there will be a lot of difficulties in this decade for many people, whether it be financial or health or both. So we have an opportunity here to walk that cycle and that journey in a higher state of experience. Come out on the other end, and we'll be so much farther ahead because of it. Or we can struggle and suffer and be miserable and be desperate, and we'll get to the end, and that's what we get to take away from it. So that's where I think the most important area is that we should focus our attention and our process of solving these problems.
I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, that we're going to end up exactly where we're meant to be. And that can put a lot of the pressure that many of us feel in these spiritual circles to rest, because we need that rest in the body right now in order to get through these very intense frequency shifts and, various levels of light and dark that we're managing. But you made a good point also that I want to reiterate, because I did a whole channeled course on health it's earlier this year. And one of the things that the guys were talking about, for example, was having a chronic disease like cancer. And we think that if we don't heal it in the lifetime that it arises, we will have to play it out again in another life. But they said that's not necessarily true. You could go through your entire life with cancer and not heal it, but it's how you went through it and who you became through the experience that you will evaluate beyond the veil. So keeping that in mind with everything that we're being bombarded with and have to deal with today, setting yourself up for comfort is really the main priority. And that's what I've come to and been doing in my own life. When my body isn't giving me all that I think I need in order to do the things that I believe must be done, I've learned to just default to where it wants to be. And sometimes that is stepping back from work. Sometimes that's stepping back from family events, things on the calendar, and taking time for myself. And maybe this is all about those in this community who are extra sensitive and feeling more of these dramatic shifts in the body, going through the alchemy necessary to be ready for something that we will be forging in the future. And I see that pattern come up so much in my private sessions, where I think as we move into 2025, spiritual movements are going to become really huge. Not that they're not huge already, but I think there are going to be more people on the planet who are going through what we're going through now with the extra sensitivity, that level of sensitivity that we have to frequency. And we are all coming up with the various teachings and suggestions and modalities to mentor those people along the way.
That's an important point that you just made, because you can go your whole life and have cancer and not know it and have a perfect good life, right? So I think a lot of the problem, I think, exists in our conventional medical system of diagnosis. You go to a doctor and they diagnose something, and you can go to two other doctors and they may tell you the opposite, because they're all practicing, and so you're not going to get the same opinion twice. And let's say a doctor tells you have cancer, and now you get on the cancer treadmill where you do radiation and chemotherapy and all these things, and all you've managed to do is cause more suffering in your life and more misery. When, if you're going to leave this planet because you got cancer, you're going to do it anyway. So now the guides do say and have said that when we come into this life, we have several exit points. So it's not that we predefine only one exit point, but we have several potential exit points. Depending on choices we make, we may choose one of them. But there are specific exit points, meaning you don't need to cure that cancer. You don't need to cure anything, right? Because if you're going to die of cancer at one of your exit points, it'll be because you're at your exit point, not because you have cancer. And the cancer may just show up to provide you with an exit at that time. So I think, if we take two different people, one who has cancer and another one who both of them have cancer, but one goes through chemo and all that craziness and suffers and struggles, and the other one maybe never went to a doctor in the first place, never knew they had cancer. They just lived their life. They both exit at the same time. The only difference there was one person was blissfully ignorant to the fact that they had that problem. They had cancer all along. No doctor told them that they had it. And they still exited at the same place as the other person. Meanwhile, the other person ruined their life journey by going through all this craziness to try to fix something that was just a vehicle for them exiting, that they pre-planned anyway. So I think that's an important factor to consider, is those things are set in motion ahead of time, and I think we can choose how we get there. And so I don't think health problems are a problem, just like money problems are not a problem. They are there to execute certain outcomes that we chose to have, and maybe one of those outcomes is to leave. To leave this planet at whatever point. But it wouldn't happen at random. Just like, most people our age will remember George Burns, and who was a comedian. And he smoked cigars every day of his life. And he lived to, I think, 101 years old. And most people would say, well, smoking will give you lung cancer and you shouldn't do it. But here's a guy who smoked like a chimney. And now maybe he had cancer, maybe he had lung cancer all along, but he still exited after 100 years old, where most people, if they lived that age, they would think they lived a pretty long life. And here's a person who probably paid no attention at all to health, might very well have had serious health problems all throughout, yet he lived till he was ready to leave. I think that's an important factor to consider, because, again, getting back to, it's a journey that matters, because the exit point is going to happen. And in your case, for example, like you're resting more these days. Now, maybe you're just supposed to rest more these days, right? And so there's nothing wrong. We can look at that and say, oh, something's wrong because I don't have the energy right now that I had 30 years ago. And so therefore something must be wrong. I need to go to a doctor and fix this because it's wrong. Or we can say, well, maybe at this point in our lives, we chose to rest because there are other things we're preparing for that we will need the energy for. And so we need this period of rest during this phase of our life. And so we can either rest and take the hint from our bodies saying we need to rest, or we can try to fight up against the need to rest by pushing. And meanwhile, all we've managed to do is cause more hardship and suffering in the journey. We're still going to end up where we're going to end up, right? And I think that's what's important to consider is I think one of the biggest problems in the conventional or even the unconventional system is diagnosis. We're all trying to pin a label on whatever is wrong. And then once we have that label, we start frantically trying to fix that thing when it may not need to be fixed. It may just be there because it needs to be there. Well, obviously, if it didn't need to be there, it wouldn't be there. And walking that path more gracefully, I think, is the most important thing that we can do as human beings, no matter what area we're challenged in.
I think that's a beautiful analogy for going through this entire time on planet Earth beyond physical health. It's hard for us to look out and see directed energy weapons and all of the lunacy that we're dealing with, and we can get really wrapped up on around that. But I think that if we find very simple and comfortable ways to get through this period of time vibrationally, we're going to affect those negative timelines that we really don't want to see manifest any longer. Now, I'm not saying there aren't things that we'll need to do. I do believe that we can't jump out of this. We're not meant to jump timelines and leave one behind and then find ourselves in a brand new one. I just don't think that's a natural way that any race throughout the universe goes through a dimensional shift like this. So yeah, we're going to have to make some pretty hard decisions. At the same time, if we can create the lifestyle that we want around some of those roadblocks and challenges, that's going to help us to find the balance that we need to get through a really imbalanced vibrational time.
One of the topics that we were planning to talk about today was technologies, right? How to evaluate different things, because there's so many out there. I think one of the biggest issues that I see in not only the spiritual community, because, growing up, and I'm pretty much self-taught in all my areas because my parents were in an entirely different mindset than I was as a child and as an adult. So I learned everything on my own from taking classes, reading books, things like that, and pursuing a lot of things that led nowhere. In terms of, studying different investment strategies or going through different programs in those areas and trying and failing, and gaining experience and wisdom in that journey. And what I've learned through that journey is anyone will promise you anything if they want to sell you their thing. That the world is full of that. Everybody. Even nowadays with social media, it's even worse because everybody puts on a pretty face and they rent out a mansion somewhere and they show you how successful they are if you only buy their book or their course. Meanwhile, they're getting rich because you're buying their book or their course. And that's something we don't realize is all of these people who are living these amazing lives are also struggling in different ways. They're just putting on a pretty face and filming a good video these days. Where, when I was younger, we didn't have social media, but, and I think that's something really important to consider is there's so many products and technologies and services and healing modalities out there today, all of which promise to cure you, and doctors too. They all have the magical formula that's going to be the magic bullet that will cure you and you're going to be great. But you have to be able to evaluate those things and figure out what's actually going to work and what's not. And this is not an issue that's exclusive to the spiritual community, because same happens in every space. And even growing up in the business and finance space, there's just as much snake oil there as there is in the health space. And the conventional medical model, they'll tell you that alternative health is snake oil. But from my experience, the conventional medical model is more snake oil than the alternative, but they both are in different areas. So you have to be able to evaluate what will work, and or at least what's worth trying. And I think in the health space, it's even in other areas as well, it's just a matter of looking at the actual facts. And I don't think a lot of people in the last few years is a perfect example of that, because everybody bought into the propaganda that our governments and quote unquote experts were telling us. Meanwhile, the actual experts were being censored, so nobody could actually hear their voice unless they were looking for them. And especially these days, we have to be willing to do the extra work to rationally evaluate these things that we're being told by our governments and medical professionals, and also things that we're buying, whether they be courses or programs or health protocols or technologies, or supplements, things like that. I think one easy way to tell what works these days is what the government bans. So in the last few years, the government banned N-acetylcysteine. They also banned hydroxychloroquine, didn't they? And the other one, I can't recall what it was. Ivermectin. The things that are banned or frowned upon tend to work, because there's no reason for the government to ban something that doesn't work, because if people try it, they don't lose anything from that. It's the things that work that the government bans. So when it comes to health, if the government is pushing something, it probably isn't good for you. This video will probably be banned too. But as a lot of our videos have been starting to get deleted on YouTube, and this may be one of them. But anyhow, if it's banned, it probably works. And I think that's something to keep an eye on. If it's pushed by the government, then it probably doesn't work, or it may even be harmful. And I think we have to use the same rationale when evaluating different technologies. I know there are a lot of technologies out there people are using these days that they speak highly about, yet I don't see the rational results. For me, if something works, it should work consistently. Another thing we've been looking into more lately is Rife. And Rife is something I followed for a long time, but I never actually had a device. And the thing about Rife that's interesting is it's banned. And you can't buy all the pieces of an actual authentic Rife machine from one person, because the government has so many restrictions that they can't sell you the entire device. You have to buy a piece from this guy and a piece from this guy and a piece from this guy and put it all together. And you can't even buy the manual for the device that you bought from the first guy from the same guy, because he's not allowed to sell it. Now, so to me, I look at that and I think, well, it must work. Otherwise, why would the government go to so much effort to prevent people from having this thing? And now maybe it doesn't work as well as it did in his time, because he didn't have to deal with the circumstances in the world today. I mean, he didn't have chemtrails and energy weapons and things like that. But it must still work to some degree. So I evaluate it that way. And plus, you can go on forums where other people have tried things and to see if the results are consistent. I don't think the anecdotal, I feel better, or I feel really at peace or more rested is a concrete result of something working, unless the thing you're trying to, evaluate is something that's supposed to give you those results. If you go to a particular direction in terms of health, for example, and the result you're looking for is the cure of that thing, then nothing but that should be the result you're looking for. So if you go to a doctor and you have cancer, and then you're expecting the doctor to cure you. If the doctor hasn't cured you, or it comes back a year later, then that is not a result. That's not a positive result, and it's not something you should try. And that's how we should evaluate things, is if we have a particular illness we're trying to solve, and we go and try a particular protocol or technology or supplement, and that supplement results in 10 other illnesses, or we cure the one thing, but then all of a sudden we have it's the same thing with the vaccine, right? Over the last few years, it didn't cure the original problem, and it resulted in 20 other illnesses now. And so now everybody who's been vaccinated has all these other problems. So that is not a result we want. I think a lot of people have stopped thinking their way through these things. And so we have to evaluate everything we do in our lives from that standpoint, especially nowadays because of social media and the control of what we're allowed to see now online has become so prevalent in our society. It's really hard to know what's true and what's not. And it's going to take that extra effort on our part to think through and evaluate the actual facts, listen to all viewpoints, and then evaluate rationally what really is true. And that's what I would say in terms of evaluating all these things. I see so many people trying different technologies, and certainly we're going to see with Pluto in Aquarius and for the next 20 years, we're going to see huge advancements in technology, in health and otherwise, I think. But we're also going to see a lot of fake things too, a lot of things that people throw out just to make money, and and they won't work, or at worst they'll cause problems. And I think I see that a lot in many things that are being used in not only in health but even in the finance space. There's so many people who are deliberately or unwittingly misguiding other people and leading them to down a road that's not good for them in terms of improving their lives in that area. And so each one of us is going to have to, it goes back to what you were saying, know thyself. Each one of us is going to have to evaluate those things for ourselves. We can listen to what everybody has to say, but in the end, we have to make those decisions based on our own journey and based on our own rational evaluation of all of these things. I know in the spiritual community, we have this tendency to say, to follow guidance, for example. And I think that's good. But the problem with guidance these days is we have the government beaming thoughts into our heads. And so how do you know what's guidance? How do you know that in the middle of the night you're having a dream that you should go get vaccinated and it's good, that that's actually your thought? So I think we have to back guidance up with actual, research and intelligent evaluation of the circumstances, especially during this time we're walking on the planet. Guidance alone, unless you're extraordinarily ego-free to where your filters are not filtering your guidance, which other than you when you're in a trance, I've not known anybody who can do that. And where you can speak directly to guidance, to a higher consciousness, where your conscious mind is not filtering that through your own biases and your own preferences. I think guidance can be wrong. And I think it often is wrong unless we can go to the pure source to that degree. So we have to use both. I think that's, as we walk from the third to the fifth dimension. Now, when we're all in the fifth dimension and we're accessing higher dimensional consciousness, then I think we can rely on guidance more. But we're not there. We're not in that place where the whole collective consciousness is operating in fifth dimension. And I think as a result, guidance can be wrong. And more often than not, I think is wrong. And where we need to bring in a little bit of rational thinking along with a little bit of guidance in order to evaluate what's what in the world that we're walking today.
In terms of guidance, what I believe personally is that what the highest level guides want most is for us to believe in ourselves. That comes through in every channeled message, in every session that I do. And they wouldn't want that if they want to tell us what to do. So I don't find that high level guides will say, use that technology. They might actually put things in your field to run across, or, there's synchronicities that are lining up that lead you down a path of discovery, but they'll never say yes or no. If you ask the question, you might get a lot of information about positives and negatives, for example, but they always, always want you to make your own decision. So ultimately, I think that's what this time is all about. We're really building that faith and trust again in ourselves as the keepers of our bodies and as the ones who are here to pave this way to the fifth dimension. I think that's a good place to wrap up for today. Thanks for joining us for another Awaken Empowered podcast. You can find us on Rumble, Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcasts. And we'll see you next week with another episode of Channeled Revelations.